So first question, Swamiji, this is from yesterday, and this is about samskaras. You briefly touched on it about samskaras, and as part of Brahma's dream also you mentioned. So the question is, how are these impressions of samskaras destroyed once and for all? How does a Jivan Mukta finally annihilate all impressions?
Yes, a very good question. And it's a question that it's difficult to find a clear answer to that in the texts. And so that we often come to it just through our own growth and inquiry. A time comes when we begin to understand it. So let me clarify both from what I have learned internally and also from great swamis that I learned from. Because again, this is the sort of thing that could be put in books, but it's not, you don't find it in books. So first of all, part that's in the books, in the Yoga Sutras, as Patanjali says, there are different states of the impressions. A samskara means a mental impression. Whenever we have any experience, which includes when we do something or when we just passively experience something, an impression is made in the mind. And many of the impressions are insignificant. They're not, we don't have an emotional reaction to the impression. And so such memories have no power, and they don't play much part in the complex drives and things that we have within us. But some experiences, some actions, reactions, and just things that we witness have deep emotional content, positive or negative. And that emotional content is what drives us forward to either repeat an action or to avoid an action, to like an action or to dislike an action, or a reaction or a situation. So all of us find that we have certain habitual reactions to things, that a certain thing in modern popular English, we call them buttons. That there's some people who are very good at learning where our buttons are, and they know just how to push them, meaning they learn what we're sensitive about and what will get a big reaction from us, usually a negative reaction. Some people take a devilish delight in going around pushing people's buttons and making them react. So why do we react? We find, all of us find, that there's certain things, certain situations, certain experiences, certain words people say, certain criticisms that have an outsized effect on us. Some things we can brush off. Other things, it hits a button. That is, it hits a sensitive point. Why? Because we have past experiences, past samskaras, impressions, which means past memories of past incidents that had an emotional impact on us. And so when that memory is triggered, directly or indirectly, the emotional impact is also triggered with it. And so there are two types of memories that we have, simplifying the situation for our understanding as well as practice. This is basically what we need to know. Anything you can make infinitely complex if you want to, but this is what we need to know. That there is the sensory memory of a situation, that something happened, and there's the memory of what it looked like, what it sounded like, what it smelled like, what it tasted. And then there is the emotional impact. It's the emotional impact only that is a problem. Sri Ramakrishna, who is fully illumined and who had burnt all of the samskaras that pushed him to act, he still knew what his name was. He knew who his mother was. He knew the name of his father. He knew where he had come from, Kamarpukur. He remembered incidents from his childhood. He remembered dancing and singing with his childhood friends, Manigraja's mango grove. So he had a memory of an unusually clear memory of his whole life. But what he didn't have were triggers, emotional triggers that had been burnt. So When we talk about burning samskaras, it doesn't mean burning all of our memories, because if we came back from that, we would have 100% amnesia. We wouldn't even be able to think, because all of the categories of thought, all of the understanding, all of the things that we had experienced and learned in life would be wiped out. So the mind wouldn't even be able to think. So burning out samskaras doesn't mean losing all of the impressions. It means burning out the emotional triggers, those things which affect us. Memories don't affect us in a positive or negative way unless they're tied to emotional triggers. So the last thing let me say, because again, this could be another talk, is that as Patanjali says in the Yoga Sutras, the samskaras, the impressions, some of them are active. They are things that are active in us now. They drive us, they make us happy and sad and miserable and anxious and everything else, because there are all these emotional triggers tied to memories. Some are inactive. They're from past lives which don't have the opportunity to be active in this life, but they may become active again in a future life where there are circumstances appropriate to those particular memories. So those right now we don't need to worry about, but sometime in the future they may cause trouble. And that's why sometimes you see a spiritual aspirant who seemed to be going full steam ahead towards spiritual attainment. They had wonderful qualities and everything, and then suddenly they have a fall from the path. That's because something from the past was suddenly triggered that they weren't even aware of that was there. Something triggered it, and suddenly they veered off the path. So those also we want to burn out, even those that we don't know about. So Patanjali says that there's some samskaras which are active, some which are inactive, some which are neutral, which we don't have to worry about. But what we can do is to reduce them to technically what's called a tanu state. Tanu means a subtle state. By not feeding the samskaras, we reduce their power. And when their power is reduced, they lose their ability to disturb us. So that's what we do when we try to desensitize ourselves to the buttons which people will want to keep pushing. We try to learn how to be insensitive to those buttons. By the fact that they are pushed, we recognize what they are in time. It takes time, but we recognize what they are. Then we begin to desensitize ourselves. So what we can do is to reduce the power of our samskaras over us, the emotional reactions over us, to experience things and just to try to maintain balance and calm in the midst of the experience. That reduces the intensity. But what we want to happen eventually is through spiritual experience, there is a destruction of samskaras. Every time we have a spiritual experience, there is some purification of the mind, which is characteristic of every genuine spiritual experience. So that's how we can tell whether we've had just a signpost along the way, which is important and which is good and wonderful, but not yet a spiritual experience, or if it's a genuine spiritual experience, because what we can call a genuine spiritual experience leaves the mind a little bit purer. It's burned out some of the samskaras. And if we have a high spiritual experience, it burns out many. After that, we feel that I'm a different person. I'm a new person. I've been reborn. And with the highest spiritual experience, all of those samskaras, the triggers, are burnt out. The memories stay. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to return and function in the mind and body. But all of the triggers are burnt out. Everything, all of our drives, all of those are burnt out. All of the desires are burnt out. So.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. Next is more, it's a question from a collective, like quite a few people asked. And you shared the example of being a witness in a horror movie. And but here is the catch, at least that's how we feel it. The catch is that we are not involved in that horror movie physically. We are somewhat mentally there, but it's not a mental involvement like where the outcome of that impacts us. So yes, from witnessing something that is not physically or mentally requires engagement, we can witness it and we can practice that. But in our day-to-day life, which requires us to function as our dad and brother and mother and sister, and our roles associated with them, our roles associated with citizenship, all those roles require duties, they require engagement. And how do we um, go through those roles? By being a witness, like taking that witness example, how do we do that? Knowing that here we are fully engaged in the outcomes of things.
Yes, no, that's a very good question. And so first, let me say that the example of the horror film, that's only an example of how we actually enjoy even horror if we're not involved in it. So that was the point. There we indeed we're not involved in it, and that's why we can enjoy it.
Okay.
And so that was the point of the analogy, was to say that if we learn to be the witness, then everything that happens, we can see beauty in everything that happens. We can see the drama of everything from the standpoint of a witness and not be affected. But the part of the question, the important part of the question is how, in the midst of duties and engagement. So yes, most of us have duties in life. We have responsibilities. There are people that depend on us. We have jobs. We are citizens of a society that expects some engagement. And so non-engagement is not a possibility for people in general. We can still practice being the witness, but we find the difficulty of how do I engage while at the same time being the witness. Eventually, we can learn to do that. It takes a lot of time and effort to learn to be the witness even while we're engaged. But there are easier ways to approach it than just the sheer determination, I'm going to be the witness and going to be uninvolved, even though I have to engage with work, have to engage with the family, have to engage with society, all of these expectations of me and everybody demanding my attention. Then I find practicing being the witness is just, I don't know how to do it because of the demands of engagement. And so that is where things like the path of karma yoga and the path of bhakti yoga come in very helpful. Because in bhakti yoga, we don't have to immediately jump to the highest position of saying, I'm uninvolved, I am the witness, I have nothing to do with anything. I'm just the pure light which illuminates all, but I have nothing to do with what's going on. That is true, but it's very hard to get there, especially when we're in the midst of the demands of life, which are intense and tend to be all absorbing. And so then it is much easier to take the attitude of a devotee of God, that whatever I have to do, I do out of love for you. That's not contrary to the path of knowledge. It's not contrary to what we just studied. Remember, this author who wrote this beautiful text, he also wrote texts on a commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is full of devotion, the love for Sri Krishna. He wrote a book on Sankirtan and Nama Japa, the repetition of a devotional mantra and singing the praises of God. The same author. He wrote these other two books as well. So the path of devotion is not contrary to this. And so the path of devotion makes it much easier. Now, some people, God means nothing to them, and that's okay. You can follow just the path of knowledge, and you can practice being the Sakshi. If that makes sense to you, then go ahead with it. That's good. That's a perfectly legitimate path. But many find that is too austere a path. It demands too much that I just can't do when everything is demanding my attention. Everything is demanding my engagement. So then karma yoga is there to teach us how to engage, and bhakti yoga is there to realize that as I engage, that I'm doing it for the sake of what? I'm doing it for the sake of you, O Lord. And Lord, who are you? You are the I am. When I feel I am, let me move out of the picture and leave you. You are the I am. I'm the simple devotee who is just a reflection, just a wave in your being. You are, and the I am is you. So the path of devotion and the path of karma yoga, they make it much easier because, first of all, karma yoga doesn't ask us to disengage. It tells us to engage, but learn how to engage so that you're not attached. And bhakti yoga gives us a higher purpose to the whole thing. So for most people, a combination of the yogas is best.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. Thank you for addressing it from all both the aspect of just using Jnana Yoga if we can practice, otherwise involving the other yogas too in our day-to-day life. Thank you so much. Now now I have a few questions all connected to God's Leela. And the first question is non-duality, and this is a combination of Rich and Sai and some other individuals who have asked similar, so I've tried to compile them together as one set. 3 questions. Non-duality says Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. So is God's Leela Mithya? That's first question. Second question is, this Leela suggests some level of prescriptedness. Then where does the free will come into it? And Swami Vivekananda was totally, he discouraged fatalism. So how does the Leela connect with the concept of free will? And the third question is, if it is God's Leela, then why does God allow bad things to happen, or God allow us to do bad things, even though we are devoted to God?
Good questions, very good questions. So first of all, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Brahman is true, the world is Jagat Mithya, the world is illusory. So is God's Leela illusory? There are 2 ways to look at that, and both are true from their perspectives. One is the way of traditional Advaita, traditional non-dualism as taught by Shankaracharya and other great exponents of the Advaita philosophy. And the other is the way taught by Shakta Advaita, that is the non-dualism of worshippers of the Divine Mother, Shaiva Advaita, like Kashmir Shaivism, followers of the Advaita by worshippers of Shiva, and by Sri Ramakrishna. There are minor differences between those 3, but they're insignificant, and so better to put them together. So traditional Advaita, their view, it's from them that we hear the teaching that Brahman alone is true, this universe is false. And that's what this Advaita Makaranda has taught, that this universe is untrue. So what does that mean? That means that from the standpoint of Brahman, if we realize Brahman, then we find that this universe, Maya, everything has disappeared completely. And in comparison with Brahman, which is eternal, Nitya, Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta, Swabhava, its very nature is ever awakened, ever free, ever illuminated. Then this universe we see as just an appearance. Everything here comes and goes. And so Vedanta says, traditional Vedanta says, that anything that didn't exist before and doesn't exist afterwards, but appears for the moment, it doesn't really exist even now. It's just an appearance. It's just a wave of appearance. And so in that school of thought, yes, the play of God, the dance of God is the Leela, is unreal. Only Brahman is real. Because of the standpoint that you're taking, is taking the standpoint of the absolute. But the Advaita of the Shaktas, of the Shaivas, and of Sri Ramakrishna say that this universe, as the Leela of God, is real. It's not real in itself. None of the Advaita schools says that the world is real as we perceive it. They say that it's real if we perceive it as the dance of God, then we're perceiving it as it should be perceived. We're perceiving it as real, but it's real as the dance of God, not in itself. So the world that Sri Ramakrishna saw when he came back from illumination, the world the great sages have seen, is not the world that we see. Yes, they see that there are 62 chairs in this room. There's a glass door over there. There's a table here with a cup of tea on it. There's an iPad in front of me. They see that, yes. But they don't see it the way I see it. They see it as just an appearance of the pure consciousness playing this dynamic play, which appears as this universe. So the way that we see it as a world of concrete reality, of stable reality, which is separate from me, which is made out of real matter, where everything is subject and object relationship, where time is real, where space is real, and causation is real. There are real effects to real causes, etc. No, that is untrue. That is untrue, even for the worshiper of the Divine Mother or of Shiva or for Ramakrishna. So the Advaita emphasizes that Brahman is the only truth because it alone is always and eternal, unchanging. Everything else comes and goes. And so how can you call that reality? So that's what they mean. So it's better in Vedanta that we speak in terms of impermanent rather than unreality, because unreality gives the wrong sense. Because I'm seeing the world, how can I say that this is unreal? I'm dealing with it. How can I say it's unreal? From the standpoint of Brahman, I can say it's unreal because it disappears completely without a trace, no trace whatsoever of it. And then if after Samadhi I come back, not everyone comes back, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say. Most don't come back. But if we do come back to the body, then we see the world again, but then we know it for what it is. We know that this is just an appearance. It's just a cloud-like mist that appears. It has no substantiality. So in comparison to Brahman, it's unreal. But as the play of the Divine Mother, as the dance of Shiva, then it is real as that. And so Sri Ramakrishna always advised people to accept what he called the Leela and the Nitya, the relative as well as the eternal. Brahman is true, but the relative play, the relative manifestation is true also as a play of the Divine Mother or as the dance of Shiva, not in itself and not as we see it. So then fatalism versus free will. Yes, Sri Ramakrishna said that actually free will, and Swami Vivekananda also said that free will is a misnomer, that the will is not free. If you give me a choice between a chocolate ice cream bar and a vanilla ice cream bar, if you know everything about my mind and my past experiences and my predilections and my body chemistry and everything, then you know which one I'm going to choose. When you give me that choice, I think, oh, I'm free to choose. I could choose this one or that one. But someone who knew everything about the contents of my mind could predict infallibly that he's going to choose that one. That means it's not a free choice. If I go to a car lot to buy a car, I think I've got all of these choices. I could choose anything. But actually, that could easily be predicted by someone who knew everything about me. They would know that I would be attracted to this color, to this style, this model, because of these features. And that, of course, I'm going to choose that one. That means it wasn't a free choice. All of our actions are like that. If we knew enough about ourselves, we could predict everything that we're going to do. And so the idea of free will is misplaced. As Swami Vivekananda said, it's based on the fact that we are free. But our freedom is not in doing. Our freedom is in being. Our freedom is in who we are. But that light of freedom is reflected through the consciousness that we are into the mind and into our actions. Just as consciousness comes down into the mind and through the nerves and makes it seem that this body is conscious. You touch my hand and I feel that I've been touched because consciousness has spread to the extremity of my skin. But actually it's not that the skin is conscious. Consciousness has spread to the extremities of my skin through the nervous system. And so freedom has spread with the light of consciousness into my actions, and I think my actions are free, my will is free. No, it's not free. Again, all of my actions could be predicted if you knew me deeply enough. And that's how there are certain rare souls who are not quacks, who genuinely have insight, who can predict things about the future truly, because they can see the chain of causes leading towards the future. And suddenly the future reveals itself to them, or some aspect of the future. Not that some people can see everything about every moment in the future for everything, but no, some people have an insight into certain things that are going to happen, and they do happen. Why? Because there is no real free will. At the same time, we can't act without the sense of freedom. If I actually believe in my present state that I have no free will, then I won't do anything. Everything I do, because my nature is free, not my will, but my nature is free. Everything that I do with that sense of freedom. It's just that I misplace it as coming from the will. And so right now, I have to take responsibility for my actions. So if I say that, well, I'm not responsible because I don't have any free will, I do what I'm made to do, so I can do anything and I don't have to face the consequences. No, I do have to face the consequences, because in my present experience, I experience myself as being free to act in a certain way, and everything that I do is going to have a consequence. And so I have to be aware of the law of karma, that if I do bad, if I harm other people, I'm going to suffer for it. And so I try to do better so that I won't bring bad karma on myself. That also could be predicted of me if you knew me completely, but still it's done with a sense of freedom. So as Swami Vivekananda said, that the sense of freedom is part of our being now. It's part of the way that we see things. But when we rise to a high, so we have to use it. We have to accept it and work with it, because it's part of our present experience, even though it's not ultimately true. But knowing, even right now, from understanding and study and thinking and meditating, knowing that everything, that I'm not free, then I can begin to practice surrender. That, oh, Mother, you guide me. You lead me in the path that I am to follow. I have to make a decision. I don't know what to do. I'm just your child. You see that I do the right thing. You guide me so that when I make the choice that I have to make that's required of me, you see to it that I make the right choice. So I begin to practice surrender. But a time comes when I will see that everything happens by the will of God. So now we get to the third part. How is it that God allows bad things to happen and people to suffer? The problem we have with the idea of God's will being the guiding force of the universe is that we see it in human terms. When we think that it's God's will that runs everything, then we see God as a busybody, making this person stand up, this person sit down, this person say something, that person not say something, make this person turn into a serial killer and turn that person into a saint. And so God is busy manipulating everybody. No, that's not what everything happening by God's will means. Sri Krishna says in several ways through the Gita that everything happens by my will, and yet I do nothing. God does nothing. God isn't making any decisions. God isn't directing things like a busybody. It's the very presence of God which makes everything happen. And because it's the very presence of God that makes everything happen, everything is happening in the very being of God. Everything is happening by the power of God. A time comes when we see in that sense that everything is happening by the will of God. And I can pray to God and find that God's will directs me. That is, when I become conscious, when I direct my mind towards God, what I'm doing is opening a channel between my individual consciousness and the consciousness of God. And then there is a communication between me and the cosmic mind of God. And then I find that obstacles are removed. The grace is lifting me up, that my circumstances are changing in spite of myself for the better. And so it's not that God is partial, it's that we are partial. Most of us have closed ourselves off from communication with God. So God is seated in the hearts of all, but we don't see that and we ignore it. And even if someone tells us that, we still don't see it and continue to ignore it. But if through spiritual discipline, I, from my side, can remove the obstacle I have put, the door I have closed to communication with God, then I find that that communication opens me to the realm of grace. And then I begin to see that God has, that God's action is directing me in everything, that God has taken my power of attorney. So I'm speaking about, of course, a high state, which we're striving to attain to. So it's a complicated situation where, yes, everything is God's play, but that doesn't mean that God is manipulating people and things and making decisions for people and all of that. No, that God is not a busybody. God doesn't do anything, but everything is happening by the presence and power of God. And when we become sensitive to the presence of God, then we find that God's power and presence is working directly through us. And then, yes, our circumstances do change by the power of God's activity. As Holy Mother said, karma has to be experienced. But for a devotee of God, perhaps you were to lose an arm according to your past karma, but instead of that, you get a scratch. That's due to the grace of God.
Thank you, Swamiji. And just you used law of karma and surrender. So first, I'm going to ask a question specific to law of karma from Rakesh. It's does the law of karma operate through one's samskaras, or is it through a, he's saying cosmic bookkeeper? I mean, is the idea is it really samskaras, or how does the law of karma operate?
Yes. Well, actually, cosmic bookkeeper is a good analogy. So, of course, it's not meant literally that there's somebody writing things down, Chandragupta writing down in the book of karma, but that image is used because it's an apt image for what actually happens. When we do anything, and anything that's significant, and anything significant means that it either has a moral component or an emotional component. So anything that that's either good or bad morally, or that has an emotional component, it makes an impression on our minds, but it also makes an impression in the cosmic mind, a cosmic memory. And that's why I do something in this lifetime which may not fructify until my next lifetime. I don't even remember who I was in the previous lifetime. And so how is it that something that I did in that lifetime as a different person with a different identity and different memory is realized in this lifetime? It's because of the cosmic memory that is made, where the cosmic impression which is made when I do an action. So there's the internal psychological factor, and there's the external cosmological factor, the cosmic memory which is made also. And that is what keeps the individual experience and the cosmic experience in tune.
Thank you so much, Swamiji, for clarifying that. Sai had a question on your comment about surrender. And we all as bhaktas know that concept again is easier, but easy to understand, but very difficult to practice. And I didn't know this, but Sai has quoted Ramana Maharshi. So he said, Ramana Maharshi once said, either ask who am I or surrender to me. What can this surrender possibly mean?
Yes, that's a very good point. That Ramana Maharshi, he taught the highest Advaita, the same as this Advaita Makaranda. For those of I myself love Ramana Maharshi, have studied his works. So this is very much in tune with what Ramana Maharshi used to teach. He taught the highest non-dualism. When people would come to him and say, "Sir, I want to help the world," he would say, find out who you are, and then find out if there is a world that is to be helped. And so everything, he would turn people back to themselves. But the same Ramana Maharshi spoke frequently of surrender. He would talk about the need for surrender and the surrender to God. He wrote a beautiful letter to his mother after he had renounced the world and come to Tiruvannamalai about how nothing happens except by the will of God. And so all we can do is to accept the will of God and abide by it. And he would often say, as Sai mentioned in his question, he would often talk about either follow the path of inquiry, who am I, or surrender. Sometimes he would say surrender to me, sometimes he would say surrender to God, sometimes he would surrender to the divine will, which all comes to the same thing, basically. So when Ramana Maharshi said surrender to me, he didn't mean surrender to this body that's sitting here that seems to be conscious, but to I who am identified with the cosmic reality. So how to do that? The problem with surrender is surrendering. Easy to understand the basic general concept, but how to apply it. So when we haven't seen God, we haven't realized God, we don't feel a direct connection with God, even though there is one always, but we don't feel it, we're not aware of it, then how to surrender? So we begin by praying, asking God to teach us surrender, to teach us, to reveal God, his or her, I'll speak in terms of her, the Divine Mother, but it doesn't matter. We pray to the Divine Mother to reveal her presence to us so that we can more easily surrender. And then we also, when we have to make choices and have to do something, we say, Mother, I don't know what to do. You please guide me in what to do. We still have to make the decision because Mother doesn't jump out of the sky and say, okay, do this, don't do that. We don't get a direction. So we pray, Mother, I have to make a decision, so you please guide my decision. So it's in tune with your will. Along with that, we have to remain flexible so that if for some reason we feel we're going in this direction, but we feel a strong push in another direction that's coming from, it seems to be coming from a higher source, that we're able to change direction when we need to. That doesn't mean that we start reading circumstances and trying to judge by circumstances, because that's dangerous. Let me give an example. A brahmachari that I knew, he wanted to go see a man who had, a good religious man of the Seventh-day Adventist, not a Vedanta, but a man who had gotten in trouble for not really a fault of his own. He had made a decision and done something which turned out wrong, which he had no way of knowing would turn out wrong, but he was made responsible for it and put in jail for several years. So this brahmachari of ours knew him and wanted to go see him, but he was conflicted about it. And so he got out and he went to the car to drive 75 miles or so to see him in prison. And he found that the car had a flat tire. So he decided, oh, God doesn't want me to go. So he didn't go and gave up all idea, never went. No, if you find that you are going to do something good and you have a flat tire, you're never going to do anything good if you're ready to give it up at the slightest obstacle. So you go out and fix the tire because you know that every action has obstacles in the way. So don't read too much in circumstances that I wanted to do something good, but I had a flat tire, so God must not want me to do it. No, that's an obstacle that by overcoming the obstacle, you're gaining in strength, gaining in power. And so get over it and do what you are going to do, which is good. But sometimes we suddenly feel that, no, this is not good. This is not the way I should go. And then we change course. So don't become flaky. Don't jump from thing to thing because your mind is always changing. Only when you feel an inner direction has changed and you feel that, no, I'm supposed to go this way, and you feel sure about it, then be ready to change course. So again, to simplify it, to go back to what I said before, first pray, ask for the revelation of God's presence and the revelation of God's will. And when you do things, pray, may I do it according to your will, not according to what I think is best for me. Recognize that you don't know what is best for you. How many times you have thought you knew what was best for you and it wasn't what was best for you. So pray that God's will be done. And gradually, we begin to feel that we're being guided by the will of God.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Swamiji. The next question is about, it's really two questions. Again, it's about the relationship with world, and it's connected to the teachings. And the teachings connection comes through detachment. So once we know and how the scripture says it, and you kind of mentioned how by being a witness you learn to be detached. First part of question is that, well, if we detach, we know we'll be at peace. But then from a pure role perspective, your family members will feel, well, you are detached, you are not interested in it. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is, you could also, by being detached and witness, you could see somebody suffering and say, well, God is in this person, and this person is suffering because God, he doesn't know that he has God in it, so let me just let him be. So the question is, we know that there is true suffering, at least from our objective experiences, and we know there are people who need our help. And this is qualified, but I'm just stating the question as is. We feel people need help. So do you act to serve the suffering, or do you detach and witness and be at peace?
Yes, that's a good question. So it's not an either or. When you see someone who is suffering and you have the power to help them, then help them by all means. That was Swami Vivekananda's consistent teaching, that if someone is suffering and you have the power to help them, then do help them. But don't let that principle become the cause for becoming a busybody. There are many people who don't want our help. And there's some people who are so filled with themselves and with their own helpfulness and their obsession to help everybody that they force themselves on people who don't even want their help. And so learn to discern that here there's something that I can do. Let me do it, and let me do it quietly. Let me not inject myself into it so that I'm the important part of the situation. No, the person is in need. It's filling their need which is important, not me. So let me not inject myself. Let me help where I can. And also let me see if they actually need help, or if I'm just thinking that I'm so important that I need to go around and help everybody. We've probably all known, and I've certainly known people who go around injecting themselves into everybody's life, trying to be the helper, and they just become a bother to everybody. So that we shouldn't do. So when you can help, help. Oftentimes we find that there are situations where we think that we can help, but actually we can't. And so with maturity, we begin to learn that there's some problems people are going through that they have to go through themselves. I can't do it for them. So that also we have to learn that I shouldn't, again, think so much of my help or of my importance that everybody needs my help. No. Many times people have to go through difficulty in order to learn something. And so stand back. There's a old story told about this of a sage who lived in the forest ashram, and he had a young brahmacharya, a child brahmacharya living with him to study. And the brahmacharya found a cocoon and brought it to the teacher to show him. And the teacher explained to him that this is a cocoon. There's a caterpillar that's gone inside. It will stay in the cocoon until it matures, and it will come out a beautiful butterfly. And so keep it in a safe place where it won't be disturbed. Don't disturb it. And one day you will see the butterfly come out. But when the butterfly comes out, it will have to struggle against the threads of the cocoon. Don't disturb it. Let it struggle, because it's in the struggle that it will mature. So don't disturb it. And so the boy took the cocoon, and one day he began to see that a hole was opening up in the cocoon. He saw activity through the hole going on inside, and realized that the butterfly was emerging, as the teacher had said. So the butterfly got out of the cocoon, but its wings were still, the edge of its wings were still stuck to the cocoon. And the butterfly struggled and struggled and struggled to get free. And the boy couldn't stand it. He thought the butterfly is going to die. So the boy freed the wings of the butterfly. And then the butterfly struggled. It couldn't fly. It fell over and eventually died because it couldn't fly. So he went to the teacher and told him what had happened. The teacher said, I told you not to disturb the butterfly. What it was doing was strengthening its wings by fighting against the bondage of its cocoon. Without strengthening itself by struggling against the cocoon, it doesn't develop the strength to fly. And so by thinking that you were freeing it, you actually have killed the butterfly because it couldn't develop what it needed. So we have to learn that wisdom also, that there are things that we can't help with. And we can pray, we can wish well, but we have to stand by and watch. So we have to be very, very discerning when we go to help someone.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. The example of butterfly will stick with me. And I'd heard a similar the example on the lobster, the fish with scales, the same idea that they have to grow and get a bigger scale. So they go through some pain and as they are growing, because their shell has to keep growing.
Yes, yes.
So this question is again connected to our relationship with the world. And this is about devotees that are in community. The question is this, that as we become part of the Vedanta society or our spiritual practices, we see the transformation in ourselves, and we feel really blessed to have that. Having said that, we also notice that there is a world even within our community that may not be transforming as fast, and the larger world that is really doesn't feel like is getting any of this message. But we know how important this is, how real this is. So the question is, if we feel it and we transform it, why isn't the world seeing it, transforming it also?
Yes, and that's a good question also. So two parts to it. One part is the individuals within the community that don't seem to be transforming. All of us come into a spiritual community bringing ourselves. We are the ones who enter into community. And the people who enter into community, into a spiritual community, are people who are seeking transformation, not people who have attained to perfection. And so whenever you go into a spiritual community, know that you are finding ordinary people who, for whatever reason, are aspiring for something higher. You're not going to a community of saints. If we were already saints, we wouldn't need a community. We would just be. And so a community of spiritual seekers always has all types of people at various levels of development. And some people, their karma allows them to go forward faster. Some people seem to be stuck in their feet stuck in mud because of past karma. But that we just have to leave people alone. We can't make people progress. And we may find that the very people that we thought were not progressing as we felt that we were being transformed, it may be in time that one day we'll wake up and find that they have gone far ahead of us. So again, as I said yesterday, Swami Prabhavananda used to say, I think it was yesterday, don't judge until you see the whole story, until you see the whole span of a person's life. Then you can see how the dynamics that were going on in their life. Little setbacks, little periods of backsliding or just not going forward, that can happen to anyone. And so don't judge people because of that. Know that people enter into a community to better themselves, and each can only do that according to their own abilities and karma. So the other part is that the world at large, practically all of us, I think, especially any of us who have a natural goodwill for people, when we come to something like Vedanta, in our case, come to Vedanta simply, and see that it's done great good for us, then we wonder, why doesn't everyone take this up? It would help everybody. So the problems of the world, some of them are so easy to solve just by these principles that we study. The problem is that one has to be able to see that for them to help. If you could go out into the world and preach from the top of your voice these principles in the most beautiful and eloquent language possible, the vast majority of the world would turn their heads and just say, what is that nut talking about? That doesn't make any sense. So people don't want to hear this. The world goes on in its own way. As one of my teachers, my main Upaguru, that is subsidiary guru, he used to tell me something that I found to be very true in my own experience, and all of us can find, that this world is operating under tremendous dynamic forces, gigantic forces, with the weight of history behind them. And so many people think that, well, I can go and fix the problems of the world. I know what the world needs. I heard, not to pick on him, but it's an example of someone who is very famous and many people look up to him, but who has childish ideas in certain ways, and that is Bill Gates. I once heard him not too long ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, being interviewed, and he was saying that, yes, in the software of the world, there are still a few bugs, but we're working those bugs out. As if the world were such a small thing, that a small, little, insignificant person like Bill Gates can work out the bugs in the world, and the world will no longer have any problems. That's just stupidity. So again, I'm not picking on Bill Gates as a problem. The problem is that the vast majority of people have such stupid, small minds as that, as to think that the world is such a small place that there are a few bugs in the software of the world. We'll get those bugs worked out as if it were just a computer program that could be written down for programmers to examine, and then everything will be hunky-dory. No, that's stupid. That's just immature thinking of small minds. The world is not like that. The world is a huge dynamism, a huge cauldron of dynamic forces which are working. People like Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna and other great world teachers before them come to the world to give a push to the world, to give a new direction to it. But even they find, even for them, it takes hundreds of years before their work begins to manifest. The main work that Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna did is hidden. It's at the foundations of the dynamism of the world, the foundations of the dynamism which makes history, which pushes societies in the directions that they are going. They worked there, their main work. The work that we see, their teaching and everything was important, but the larger work was that. And but it will take hundreds of years before we begin to see the effects of that, because they've given a new turn to the direction of world history. But even that takes centuries to work out.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. So Swamiji, I want to just take a quick time check. We have 6 minutes left. I have one conceptual question from Rakesh, and then one question from Mark, I believe is very true for everybody, which is about practice. So I'm going to go through these two. There are 2 other questions. One is about black holes, the other is about Buddhism. If we have time, we'll do it. And if not, maybe I can send them to you. And if you give us a written response, I can forward it to we'll forward it to the attendees. So the first question from Rakesh is about change. And it's a conceptual thing. The concept in the book, it says only a changeless witness can actually experience change. And Rakesh's more objective question is, we perceive change in daily life via memory. I remember how something happened yesterday. So, it's a change from yesterday to today. So if I can see that change, how can I be changeless?
Yes. Well, that you can be changeless because you're not your memory. You yourself are witnessing your memory, the things that your memory is putting forward. So the idea is that if everything is changing, even with memory, there has to be something against which that memory is being perceived. something against which the change is being perceived. Because even memory is changing. You're acquiring new experiences. You're forgetting things, and so forth. So yes, the eye can perceive changes in the world, even though the eye is changing, because the eye is relatively stable. The film screen can show, you can project a film against it, because though the projection screen is changing, it's changing so slowly, it's maintaining the same pattern for a long time. So the changes of the film are much faster, you can project them. But eventually you have to come to that which is unchanging in order to know that everything changes. And that unchanging thing is you, is consciousness. Why is it that you feel that you are the same little boy or girl that lived long ago in your childhood? You've changed completely. Your body has changed, your mind has changed, but you have the sense it's not just memory. It's that there's something that is continuing through those experiences. Why is it that you feel I'm the one that was in deep sleep, even though I didn't have a body, mind, or ego or memory? I was the same one who was dreaming, though the circumstances were completely different. I'm the one who is in the waking state. So somewhere there has to be something which is unchanging. There can't just be change, understanding change. And so, yes, memory is there, but what is it that perceives the memory itself? That is unchanging. The mind is changing, yes, memory is changing, but consciousness doesn't change.
Thank you, Swamiji. And this question from Mark, I think, is all of our question at some point in life and currently also, is this is great concept. How do we practice this? So you have shared that, sadhana is required and we need to practice. We know the, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. But Mark's question is very specific, that when we are in this forum and we are awakened, we feel awakened, and we go to the real world and we encounter a problem. So the question is there a bridge or a mantra or a path which will help us remind ourselves, like, it's kind of a flip of a switch, that's a quick reminder that, hey, you're still a witness, or this is not real. So he's asking for this, and I think you've addressed it, but if you could, because this is everybody's question.
Yes, no, that's a good question, and that is everyone's question who is interested in spiritual life, who is interested in transformation. So unfortunately, there's not just a switch that can be switched on. But what does exist is the concept of repeated practice, what you do every day. So try to establish some sort of practice every day. It's better to do 5 minutes of practice every day than 5 hours one day and then burn out, so you don't do it for another 3 months. And then you try 5 hours again and you burn out and don't want to do it for another 6 months. No, do what you can do every day. And by sowing a seed every day, you begin to, a seed of practice every day, you begin to reap a habit. So habits that we have that we don't like, as well as good habits, all of them are nothing but repeated actions. And so repeat your spiritual practice every day. Take an amount of time that you know that you can do every day without having a reaction, so that you never want to do it again. Once an American Swami came to see me in San Diego that I was close to, Swami Sahajananda from Olima in Northern California. He had come down to San Diego just for the day, and he came to see me at the center. And he was very abrupt about everything that he did. So he walks into the center and sits down and says, "So what is your spiritual practice?" No, hello, how are you? How's everything going? None of that, just sits down. So what is your spiritual practice? And so I began to say, well, on a daily basis, and then he stopped me and said, yes, that's it. It's what you do every day that counts. And that's true. A retreat like this and other retreats, occasional ceremonies and the things that we do, those are good to give us extra inspiration and motivation and so forth, new ideas and so forth. But it's what we do every day that tells the most, because that goes deep into us. So do something every day. Then we begin to find that if we do something every day, gradually that begins, because it's repeated so often every day, it begins to spread into other parts of our life. And then we can find little ways to remind ourselves to think of something, whether by keeping a picture on our desk, a holy picture on our desk, or a book on our desks that every now and then our eye is going to fall on it. And when it does, make the practice of stopping for a minute and remembering what it is and why it's there, that you put it there so you would remember to think of your spiritual ideal. Doing japa, doing prayer, practicing being the witness, practicing mindfulness, just being present with whatever happens, keeping your mind present with all that happens. All of those are wonderful ways of developing a practice that gradually spreads into the rest of your day.